Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session, Modernizing the Census Bureau Statistical Foundation through Enterprise Frames. My name is Deirdre Delpiaz Bishop, and I'm proud to serve as the Census Bureau's Chief of the Geography Division. I'm also very honored to serve as the Executive Champion of the Frames program, and will be emceeing our session here today. The Frames program is a key part of the Census Bureau transformation and modernization. It's one of 4 key pillars of integrated change, alongside with the programs you see here: data ingest and collection for the enterprise, or DICE, the Enterprise Data Lake, or EDL, and the Census Enterprise Dissemination Services and Consumer Innovation, or CEDSI. Together, as you see on this slide, these pillars are creating a new business ecosystem to modernize our statistical foundation. The Frames program consists of a program management office located in Geography Division and 4 teams: the Geospatial Frame team, the Business Frame team, the Job Frame team, and the Demographic Frame team. The teams are focused on enhancing our existing frames of information, our existing data sets at the Census Bureau about addresses, businesses, and jobs. Those include the Master Address File and Tiger database, the Business Register, Longitudinal Business Database, and the Government's Master Address File, and the data sets within the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Program, or LEHD. Additionally, the Demographic Frame team is building a new data set of information about people. In addition to enhancement and development of these key data sets, the Frames team are working together to identify ways to efficiently link information from one frame to another, as well as to link data from other sources. Doing this will ultimately allow our researchers to create timelier and more accurate statistical and geospatial products. Let's now take a look at things in more detail. In our current state, the 4 foundational frames are linkable, but each resides in a separate location. Querying these frames to locate and link information is like having to visit different ponds if interested in catching different kinds of fish. We envision linked frames existing in a common computing environment, the Enterprise Data Lake. Now, a variety and diversity of data are co-located, making it possible to locate and gather a large volume of data. What can the frames tell us about a particular location? In this example, we have a building that contains 6 units. The geospatial frame contains the address of each unit. Address sources identify each as residential or non-residential. The business frame contains records for businesses located in 3 of the units. This confirms the non-residential status of each of these addresses and identifies the type of business activity occurring at the address. The job frame has records for workers employed by the businesses at units 2 and 3. The business at Unit 1 has no job records associated with it. It's a small business operated solely by the owners. The demographic frame contains records for individuals living in the 2 units on the top floors. We can identify the number of individuals in each unit and their characteristics. This also confirms the residential status of these units. The address for the 4th floor unit appears in both the demographic frame and the business frame because it's a home-based business. The geospatial frame attributes indicate a mix of uses. Going beyond this, we can link the demographic frame and the job frame to identify which of the residents in units 5 and 6 are employed, and if so, what kind of job they have. Then, we can link to the business frame to find out who they work for. Perhaps it's one of the businesses in units 2 and 3. And if not, we can identify where those people commute to. One of the benefits of linked frames in a common computing environment is the ability to use data in one or more frames to help inform and update data in another frame. This is already possible with frames located in different environments, but co-location makes the task much easier. Let's start with a structure and a location. The geospatial frame contains the address for a building that we can see using imagery, which may be commercial or residential. From external appearances, it's not clear. Address sources will list the location as one or the other. When we look into the business frame, we see that there's a business at the location with a NAICS code that identifies it as a skilled nursing facility. There's definitely a business use, but the fact that it's a nursing facility suggests that there might be a residential component, but we can't be certain. The job frame indicates there are workers associated with the location, which adds to our knowledge. The demographic frame contains records for multiple individuals residing at this address. After observing the demographic characteristics of the individuals at this address, we might conclude it is a group quarters. But to be sure, we need to know a little bit more. We can link the frame's data to other sources of information about the location. Publicly available property and tax assessor data lists the location as a commercial enterprise, providing a home for the elderly. And the facility's website tells us the facility offers both assisted living and 24-hour memory care. By linking these sources, we can quickly gain a full picture of the nature of a particular location, all from within the office, utilizing data that we already have available to us, and thus avoiding the need to visit in the field or contact through other means. Now that we know the location is a group quarters, we can make decisions about enumeration, follow-up, and much more, since the demographic frame contains information about residences. We've seen how linking the frames as well as other data sources can help us identify the location provides assisted living and 24-hour care. The demographic frame provides information about the number of residences and their characteristics. How can we then use this information linked to other data to help assess and respond to different situations? Let's look at a potential emergency response situation involving the facility. The impact of a flood event on access to the facility, both on the part of medical and other staff working at the facility, as well as emergency responders. Geospatial data, such as flood maps, elevation data, stream flow data, can tell us where flooding may occur or where flooding has occurred. Geospatial data related to the road network and location of hospitals or other facilities are needed for the analysis. Also, residential locations of workers, which we can identify by linking the job frame, demographic frame, and geospatial frame data, is available. Linking these data shows us that 2 of the staff are able to reach the facility. In addition, the flood has cut off the facility from the closest hospital along the shortest route. This has 2 implications in the event of an emergency. Either responders come from a more distant facility, or responders from the nearby facility must take a longer route. In either situation, response time is impacted and lengthened. In this last use case, we want to measure the impact of a government program providing incentives for businesses to move into high poverty neighborhoods. The goal is to reduce poverty in the neighborhood. This use case brings together data from all 4 foundational frames, as well as other data sets to measure the impact of the program and provide evidence for decision-making. A business takes advantage of government incentives and locates to our high poverty neighborhood. The business frame tells us about the company. The job frame provides information about the number of employees when the business moved. The business then hires additional employees, 1 from within the neighborhood, 1 from the adjacent neighborhood, and 2 who live elsewhere, let's say in the suburbs. The job frame linked to the demographic frame and the geospatial frame provide the information we need to know the characteristics of the workers and where they live. Reducing poverty in a neighborhood goes beyond the incentive-receiving company hiring workers from within the neighborhood. We also would want to know how many new businesses start up, perhaps to serve the needs of the workers as well as local residents. The business frame tells us there were 2 new businesses in the neighborhood and 1 in the adjacent neighborhood. The job frame tells us how many people each has. Last, we ask where all the money goes. How much stays in the neighborhood as residents, including those in newly created jobs, spend money locally? And how much flows out of the neighborhood, perhaps back to the neighborhoods in which the company's employees live, or money spent by the neighborhood residents in businesses located elsewhere. Linking to other data sets about purchasing and spending may help answer these questions. Evidence-based decision-making, such as this, requires linking a variety of foundational data, as well as other data sets, and managing and analyzing these data in a common, robust computing environment. Let's now return to the business ecosystem graphic. Perhaps the work you do fits into one or more of the processes flowing from left to right. Data collection and acquisition, data processing, analysis, product creation, or data dissemination. In closing, I want to focus on the lower right. This is where we all fit in, where we all have a role to play as we think about the work we do and the data and information we produce. Perhaps you've identified ways to improve processes and can feed those into the ecosystem. Or maybe in talking with data users, you've identified a need for new sources of data for existing programs or products. Or perhaps new questions that our customers want to answer, which leads to new linkages of data in our ecosystem, leading then to analysis and products that help to answer those questions. The box and the arrow in the lower right reminds us that our ecosystem is constantly evolving. I'm really excited about that. And I believe that you will be too after this session about modernizing the Census Bureau Statistical Foundation. I'd now like to pass things off to Lori Zaire. Lori is going to tell us more about the FRAMES program. She works within the Geography Division and is our FRAMES Program Senior Technical Lead. Lori, please take it away.
Thanks, Deirdre. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending our panel on the enterprise frames. I'm excited to discuss with you how we're modernizing the Census Bureau's Statistical Foundation and to dive a little bit deeper on how we are going to do some of the use cases that Deirdre just presented. So Kayla, next slide. Oh, thanks. Perfect. By the end of my presentation, we will have talked about the vision for the FRAMES program, the problem solved, and the benefits of the FRAMES program, a little bit about the current state of each frame, as well as the future state or where we're headed with each frame. And before I dive into some of that, I'd like to start by defining what I mean by a frame. And I define it within the context of the FRAMES program because there are many different ways to define a frame. So in the context of the FRAMES program, a frame refers to a collection of data sets that are organized around one of our 4 foundational units: a person, a business, a location, or a job. And a frame is supported by a collection of standard methods, codes, processes, documentation, and subject matter expertise. So really, the FRAMES program lies in this second box, all of the subject matter expertise and methods around the management of the frames. And then last, I'd like to note that a sampling frame often refers to a subset of the larger foundational data set, or the larger foundational frame may be the sampling frame. So the reason that we're doing the FRAMES program, the challenge that we're addressing, the Census Bureau has long maintained frame-like data to support census and survey operations. And these frames contain universe-level information on individuals, households, businesses, and governments. And this information is collected and maintained by a multitude of programs, censuses, and surveys across the Census Bureau. But each frame serves as a primary purpose. although each frame serves as a primary purpose, I'll say, there are many overlaps and duplicative fields across the frames, and so multiple frames might contain identical information or similar records, or even duplicative information about a given record. And then these frames at Census Bureau are in an uncoordinated and unintegrated environment. We can't easily cast that net like Deirdre showed early on to sample across all the frames or to extract information from all the frames right now. And we don't have any systematic processes in place that allow us to directly link those records or the information contained in one frame to information on records in another frame. So again, we're fishing from the different ponds instead of using that net. So in summary, the Census Bureau has a business need for a modernized data infrastructure, and part of our answer, or the Frames program is part of the answer to that. Our modernized infrastructure will be a linked universe of information from which sampling can occur and statistical summaries can be directly produced. And Frames will be available for enterprise-wide operations and available to internal users to leverage for new and improved statistical products. The vision of the Frames program is to create enterprise-wide frames that are linkable in nature, agile in structure, accessible for production or research on a need-to-know basis, and that adhere to best practices in terms of technology usage, data management, and methodology. And by linkable in nature, we mean that each frame will include the necessary unique identifiers or keys for linkage to the other frames. So you'll, like Deirdre described in her introduction, we'll have location information for people and where their jobs are, or if they're self-employed or working at home, and location information for where businesses are established. And then we will also be able to link people back to their jobs and jobs back to their employers. So next slide. Thanks, Kayla. What will this data infrastructure look like? This new linked data infrastructure look like? So on this slide, I'll show you a conceptual diagram that depicts the vision of the Frames program. And this is a future state vision, but some aspects of this diagram already exist or are already underway at the Census Bureau. And this first column shows that the 4 frames will be developed and derived from multiple sources of data, including administrative records, survey and census data, public records, and other third-party commercial data. And these data inputs will be collected and ingested through DICE, data ingest and collection for the enterprise. After those records are ingested, the Frames program accesses the source data and constructs the geospatial, business, job, and demographic frames. And data within those frames will be linked and accessible by, within, and across the individual linked frames using the unique identifiers. And this is shown in the diagram with the lines labeled linkage infrastructure. This infrastructure will also support linking auxiliary data sets to the enterprise frames. So maybe you want to evaluate or include paradata along with frame data. You'll be able to do that by linking it back to the data rather than the frames including every single field of every single auxiliary data set that the Census Bureau maintains. And then finally, products and services will be generated from data in the frames to support programmatic and research activities, including things like sampling frames and data products and new innovations. And lastly, I'll mention before we move on, this is currently an internal use only project. And the Frames program does sit at the center of the Census Bureau's overall vision for how we transform the way we conduct our work and how we manage and use and also reuse our foundational data that underpin the work that we do to carry out our mission. Now I'd like to dive into the 3 of the 4 frames today. And I'm going to start with the geospatial frame. Geography is the organizing principle underpinning the Census Bureau's mission. That is, all activity that we measure occurs at a location or in multiple locations or between locations. In the current state, the geospatial frame exists as the master address file, or the MAF, which is a national list of more than 200 million addresses, which currently prioritize and primarily focus on residential addresses. The master address file is linked to the topologically integrated geographic encoding and referencing, or TAGR system. And the map serves as the source of address and location information for decennial census, American Community Survey, and other household and demographic surveys. And the master address file is updated using information from the U.S. Postal Service, tribal, state, and local governments, and other data collection operations. Now, to effectively serve as the foundation for the enterprise-wide set of linked frames, the master address file must be expanded and enhanced to include the full range of addresses and respondent locations needed by all Census Bureau economic and demographic programs. And it needs to meet expectations of internal users for timeliness, completeness, and accuracy at a given point in time and when the data are extracted. So we don't want to be limited to twice yearly benchmarks or extracts anymore. In the future state, the geospatial frame will store a comprehensive set of addresses at which residential, business, and other activities are measured by the Census Bureau. So this will include mixed-use addresses as well. The geospatial frame will provide master address file IDs or MAF IDs and geocodes for all addresses in the frame. The team is working to develop address matching or record linkage tools, which will allow users to link new data sets to existing addresses in the geospatial frame and provide a MAF ID and a geocode for those addresses. And then the geospatial frame will be linkable to other enterprise frames. The addition of address management tools will enable this, and then this will allow users to expand on their understanding of businesses or mixed-use addresses in a way that will help us support the work of the business and the job frames. Moving on to the business frame. In the current state, the business frame is produced and maintained as the business register. And the business register is a national list of more than 30 million businesses, and it serves as the source of sampling and publication for the economic census, and it's used to identify target populations for business statistics programs. The business register is updated using IRS tax records and data that we receive from Bureau of Labor Statistics, Social Security Administration, the economic census, and other census surveys. And aspects of the business register are already updated using information from the master address file, but it's not fully streamlined. In the future state, the goal of the business frame is to transform how we build and use the various business frames within the Census Bureau. And that future state centers on us making the following changes. The business frame will be a collection of rich, harmonized business data that are stored in a centralized location. The business frame will incorporate the longitudinal business database into the business register infrastructure, which will allow us to leverage that more consistent methodology on how we harmonize longitudinal information about businesses. As many of you know, the LBD is actually a derivative of the BR, but they're maintained separately. The business frame will also connect the government's master address file to the business register, which will allow the business frame to improve the quality of information about the government NAICS or industry sector, the NAICS sector. And finally, the business frame will be linkable to other enterprise frames. So this will help us leverage the business frame from a geospatial perspective, where we can hopefully do a better job identifying things like group quarters or nursing homes or skilled nursing facilities, like Deirdre was discussing in her introduction. The last frame I'm going to cover today is the job frame. In the current state, the job frame already exists as a frame that was built as part of the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Program, or the LEHD, and it contains more than 14 billion records, which is a lot. And the reason that it contains that many is because a record or a job is defined as a relationship between a person and a firm in which the person has earned at least $1 of wages in a given quarter from that firm. So every person, quarter, firm observation where at least $1 was earned is a record for the LEHD. The current LEHD job frame covers more than 97% of private employment and most federal, state, and local jobs, but it doesn't include self-employment. It is constructed and maintained to support public use data products. And in its current state, the job frame actually assigns demographic characteristics to workers using an internal frame that they call the individual characteristics file, and firm characteristics to employers using an internal frame that they maintain called the employer characteristics file. When we transition to the future state, or as we transition to the future state, the job frame is and will continue to expand on the job frame that already exists for the LEHD. It will result in us maintaining two linked databases of jobs. First will be the database that the LEHD already maintains, which is the quarterly job frame derived from the quarterly unemployment insurance wage records supplied to the Census Bureau through partnerships with the states. And the second database will be an annual job frame derived from W-2 records. And this is something that economists at Census Bureau have been researching for a while in CES, and this will be a new feature of the job frame. Another new and exciting feature of the job frame is that self-employment jobs will be part of the job frame, expanding on the job coverage that the LEHD has traditionally included. Finally, I want to close with the point on the job frame that the job frame will, in the future state, be able to focus explicitly on job records. So a moment ago, I mentioned that they maintain their own worker and employer characteristics, but in the future state, because the job frame will be linkable to other enterprise frames, the job frame should be able to derive demographic characteristics of workers from the demographic frame, and then addresses, addresses ID from the demographic frame as well, and then employer locations from the business frame. I'm going to skip discussing the demographic frame because you're going to hear plenty about that next. And I will move on to my conclusion slide, which is where I will cover, I'd like to discuss a handful of the benefits of the FRAMES program. The FRAMES program fosters an environment that allows us to do more work virtually. So for example, if we can identify vacant housing units in the office, we don't have to go out into the field to validate every single one of those addresses. FRAMES reduces burden on respondents by reusing information that we already have in one or more of the frames. And it reduces duplication, manual efforts, and one-off data cleaning projects because we curate it once for the frames and then we don't have to do it again for every project after that. This in turn allows more time for production and research activities. And also we're developing the frames in a way that allows us to trace our code and data throughout the process, which facilitates reproducibility. And all of these will expand on our ability to report on changes and trends that affect the nation's population, economy, and communities. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions at the end or in the chat.
Thanks so much, Lori. Lori did a beautiful job of sharing how the FRAMES program is creating an infrastructure which will allow statistical modernization here at the Census Bureau. She told us a little bit about the geospatial frame, the business frame, the job frame. Now I'm excited to introduce Jennifer Ortman. Jennifer is working within our population division and serving as the demographic frame team lead. And Jennifer is going to talk to us more about how we're building the demographic frame here at the Census Bureau. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Deirdre, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here sharing the work that we've been doing on the FRAMES program. And now we're going to dive into the demographic frame. So I'm going to give you an overview of the demographic frame, and then you'll hear some additional presentations that will follow mine. We'll get into some use cases and some evaluations of the demographic frame. So hopefully you're into the data about people. So by the end of my presentation, you should have a sense of what the demographic frame is. I'm going to speak briefly about how we're building it and talk about the current extracts that we're providing to our data users. So yes, there's a demographic frame, and yes, there is access available to Census Bureau staff and users. And then I'll finish up to help segue into the three presentations that come after mine in talking about how we're evaluating the demographic frame and what we've learned about from evaluating our current extract. Next, please. Okay. Okay, so the demographic frame is a comprehensive database of person-level data that contains demographic characteristics and addresses associated with each person on the frame. We derive the demographic frame from several data sources, primarily administrative, but we're also using some third-party census and survey data sources. The demographic frame includes unique person-level identifiers that we use to link individuals across data sets. And of course, a hallmark of the FRAMES program is that this is a resource, a database actually, that can be linked to information in other enterprise frames, as well as other data sources that would have the required linking key. And the demographic frame, as most of our data within the Census Bureau, is available to approved internal users who are working in our secured computing environment. Next, please. So we've done quite a bit in just a few short years to build the demographic frame, the prototype, the database to generate extracts. There's still quite a few things that we're working on developing, and I'd like to highlight a few of the capabilities that we're focused on. This is not an exhaustive list, but touches on some topics I think are of great interest to some of our census customers. So this includes working with others across the enterprise to improve record linkage. So there are efforts underway to review and enhance the person identification validation system, or PVS, if you've ever heard of it. This is a process that assigns the unique individual as well as address and other identifiers to data sources as they come to the Census Bureau. So there's efforts to enhance that process. And the goal of particular interest to my team and to the demographic frame is an effort to try to reduce the number of individual records that are not assigned a protected identification key. That's the individual level identifier that allows us to link data across data sets. So it's really important that we be able to assign a PIC, as we commonly refer to it, to as many records as possible to maximize their utility. There's also efforts that we're participating in to evaluate quality and determine how to best handle the remaining individuals in records that are not assigned a PIC or another identifier that allows us to link them into our database. We're also investing some time in trying to aggregate the data about people into their household and family units, as well as working to link information about individuals across time and space. So connecting individuals with different addresses that they reside at, building this frame over time. Having the frame built over time, I think, is going to be one of the things that will make it very useful to the various programs within the Census Bureau. Next, please. So I mentioned extracts. So if you have familiarity with the master address file, you may be a customer that uses a master address file extract. So very similar to the map. The demographic frame is a database, a very large database that is growing day by day as we keep adding more records to it. So we generate currently extracts for our customers. We actually have four different time points. We just generated 2 additional ones. So we started by providing an April 1, 2020 extract. Then we were able to produce a July 1, 2021 extract this past spring. And my fantastic team were able to generate 2018 and 2019 extracts. So this slide will be updated in the very near future. Those files are just recently, just a few days ago, were made available in the data warehouse to our customers. So we now have data for 2018 through 2021. Our goal is to go back, hopefully, to 2010, and then, of course, we'll keep building forward 2022, 23, et cetera, going forward for customers to have access to contemporary data as well as historic data. There are a number of variables currently included on our extracts. So we have the protected identification key, or PIC. That's that individual level identifier that facilitates linking across data sets. We have the master address file identifier. And we do include, for the time period relevant for that reference date, whether it's April 1, 2020, July 1, 2021, or whatever other reference date is available, we do provide all map IDs associated with that person record for the relevant time period. Now, because some individuals will have more than one map ID, we're leveraging a person-place model, and that's a whole entire separate presentation. But this model gives us probabilities that are associated with each map ID to let us decide which map ID is the current residence for that individual. So if somebody has two map IDs, the model will generate a probability 0 to 1. And the probability closer to 1 is usually the one we would select to say this is the address we think the person most likely lived at on this date. We do include some information about the source files, including the first and last date observed. Helps our data users understand how current the information is, as well as where we were finding it. Some customers might prioritize observations coming from IRS data versus other federal sources versus state sources, etc. And then we, of course, have demographic characteristics. We have date of birth and age, date of death of the person, if we have an indication that the person has died. We have sex, Hispanic origin, race, as well as several different geographic units to facilitate rolling up the demographic frame into generating estimates at the block group, et cetera, levels for customers. Next, please. I'm going to talk about highlight a few examples of applications that we foresee for the demographic frame. This is not an exhaustive list, but just touching on a few highlights of things, use cases we're thinking about quite actively and talking to customers about. So next, please. First on the list is thinking about how the demographic frame can serve as a sampling frame for population surveys, where a focus on ensuring a representative sample around a characteristic is a better foundation than a solely address-based approach. And some folks in the demographic directorate working on the Census Household Panel Survey are incorporating the demographic frame as part of their sampling design. So this is certainly an opportunity to think about, strategies for oversampling, better identifying where population groups of interest live, so we can do a better job of ensuring a representative sample. Also useful for thinking about doing if we were, say, focusing on a survey of the veterans population. So using the demographic frame to identify, where we think those individuals are, to really maximize our ability to get that population represented in the survey. Next. We're also very, very much thinking about how we can support enterprise initiatives such as census and survey taking. You're going to hear from both the 2030 program as well as some thoughts from the ACS program about how they're thinking about how the demographic frame might be used. I think there's many applications, and this includes efforts to try to reduce the burden on our respondents by using information already available. It can help inform our strategies for non-response follow-up and that sort of thing. So you're going to hear a little bit more about those strategies, but there's several opportunities in terms of census and survey taking. Next. And one of my personal favorites is thinking about creating data, blended data products. So merging frame data on topics that might not currently be asked on a survey or on the census to really provide more detailed information about each of America's communities. And I had the opportunity a few years ago to work on a project where there was a linkage of looking at young adults in the ACS and connecting back to their parents' IRS tax returns from when those young adults were children to help connect later life educational outcomes with earlier socioeconomic circumstances. So that's an example of the type of thing we could do here with blended data. And fourth, next slide. Certainly, I think there's many opportunities. The 2020 census has already done this and some other programs looking at how we can improve data quality by drawing upon information we already have rather than just statistical approaches. So the demographic frame will offer individual information about individuals that will hopefully help enhance our data editing and imputation procedures. Next. So I want to shift in and really set you up for the remainder of what you're going to hear about today by talking about some of the ongoing evaluations. So I've grouped them to categorize them A way to organize them is we have a set of comparisons, some being done by my team, some being done by our data users, doing person and address level comparisons. So matching person to person, address to address, to see, are we finding the same people? Are we finding the same people at the same locations across various data sources? And we're also doing in the second bucket a variety of benchmarking analyses, looking at aggregate counts. So if we aggregate people in the demographic frame by demographic group or geographic group or both, how much alignment are we seeing with various benchmarks? And then I mentioned briefly the person place model, which is an entirely separate presentation we don't have time to fit in today. But there are several models, and we're considering which model performs best so that we can make sure we're providing the best information possible to our users about where individuals live. So we're doing some evaluations around those. Next slide. So just to highlight, so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give you, share some results from one of our person and address level comparisons, as well as some of our benchmarking work. And then you're going to hear some of the results from the ACS, Econ's non-employer statistics program, and the 2030 census. So for me to close you out, you could go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to start by talking about that person and address level comparison project that my team carried out. And we call this a gap analysis, and it's focused on LEHD in their program. So go ahead to the next slide, please, Kayla. Perfect, thank you. So the demographic frame is expected, well, the hope is that we will begin providing that information about the residential location of individuals for the LEHD program, and perhaps even the demographic information. So there's a goal here that the demographic frame be able to provide that information, frees up LEHD program resources to focus on other things. So the LEHD program already has their own process for doing this. They generate a file they call the residence candidate file, or I'm going to call it the RCF, and that's what you'll hear for the rest of this presentation. If you can go to the next slide. So we wanted to carry out a gap analysis to evaluate how well the demographic frame overlaps with the RCF, and looking at a person-to-person and address-to-address level matches. Next slide, please. So the underlying question is here, do we find the same people and do we put them at the same address? Next slide. And this is just a first step. We have not decided one way or the other what the path forward is. This was an important first step to determine the feasibility of replacing the RCF with the demographic frame, and also identifying what improvements or additional questions need to be answered before such a determination can be made. Next slide, please. So I'm first going to talk about the person-to-person, the PIC coverage results. So this is the question, do we find the same people in the demographic frame and the residence candidate file? So next slide. And the good news is, the answer is yes to that question. So here I'm showing you just national level totals. So the total number of people that we found in the RCF. The next column is the total number of people in the demographic frame, the total number of people who are found in both files. And then there's a few that were only found in the RCF and a few only found in the demographic frame. But the good news, and we've very much expected this because we have very similar methodologies and very similar data sources, we found that 99.6% of people in the RCF were also found in the demographic frame. So a very high match rate there. Next slide, please. So we also looked at this by state to see, so, the national level was an excellent result, but what happens when we look at the state? And it turns out the state level we see similar for every state. It was a match rate of over 99%. So over 99% of people observed in the RCF were also found in the demographic frame when we looked by state. And I can tell you at the county level, this relationship also held. There were just 2 or 3 counties that fell below the 99% mark. So we're seeing consistency as we drill down to different geographic levels. Next slide, please. So now it seems like we're finding more or less the same people. The next question we were wondering about is, does the demographic frame put those people at the same address as the residence candidate file? So generally expecting a high degree of match here, but it's not as high of a match as just the person-to-person match. So what we found was that 90.56% of people were assigned to the same address in both the RCF and the demographic frame. So just under 10% were in a different address in the demographic frame than what they were assigned to in the residence candidate file. And this agreement ranges from 86 to 93% by state. So we're certainly seeing a little bit of variation state to state in whether we put people at the same location. Go ahead to the next slide. And then one of the things, so 10% of people were put at a different address in the demographic frame than what the RCF assigned them to. So one of the questions we had was, is this just a difference in modeling procedures, or is it something else going on? So maybe we didn't have that address associated with the person in the demographic frame. So we took a look and we found, so of the almost 10% of people who were assigned a different address in the RCF and the demographic frame, just 0.26% of those people were assigned to a math ID in the RCF that was not a math ID associated with that person in the demographic frame. So remember, we provide all of the addresses associated at a time point with the individual. So it was a very, very small, very few cases where the demographic frame did not associate that address. So it really was a difference in modeling approach that resulted in assigning a different address, not because the demographic frame was not able to find that address. And then this ranged from 0.2 to 0.5% at the state level. So results for the gap analysis were quite good. We were very much expecting it, and great to have that confirmed. So I'm going to wrap up by sharing a couple of results from our benchmarking analysis. So this is comparing aggregate comparisons, so no longer person to person, but just aggregating the number of people. And I'm going to focus just on the results by geography here. So go ahead to the next slide. And so here we're comparing the aggregate number of people. The goal is to assess quality in terms of coverage and accuracy. And we compared to the 2020 census as well as to the 2020 population estimates, which were a series of estimates based on the 2020 census. So two different benchmarks to compare to. Next slide. I'm going to show you results for the percent net coverage, and the interpretation of this metric is the relative amount that the demographic frame is less or more than the benchmark it's being compared to. So next slide. So national level results. So you have the number in the demographic frame, the number, the count from the 2020 census, and the estimate from the 2020 population estimates. And at the far right, the net coverage error. So what we learned from this is that the demographic frame is 2.45% less than the 2020 census. And it's 1.87% less than the 2020 population estimates. So I certainly was not expecting an exact match, but I was very happy to see that the aggregate difference at the national level was really quite small. And if we go to the next slide, so we don't have results through disclosure review just yet, but what I can show you is there is some variation when we look by state and counties, and this variation is very much associated with the size of the state or the size of the county. So as population size goes down, the net coverage error goes up, which is certainly something we expect to see and see in other kinds of comparisons like this. So that's highlights from the work my team has done, and that wraps up my portion. So I'm happy to hand it back to Deirdre.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was an outstanding overview of how you're progressing with development of the demographic frame. I really appreciated that you shared possible applications, all of which were very important related to the demographic frame. And the results, I think, probably have many people excited about and thinking about how they're going to use the frame moving forward. Let's now introduce Erica Marquette. Erica works in our Economic Statistical Methods Division, and she's currently serving as the Business Frame Technical Lead. Erica, welcome. Before you start, I'd just like to remind people, in the interest of time, if you have questions, please add them to the chat. We'll try to take a few at the end, but you can see we have a lot of information to share. And so if we don't get to the Q&A session, we'll definitely respond to what you put in the chat. Thank you. Erica, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Deirdre. So today I'm going to be talking about the feasibility of obtaining non-employer business owner data from the demographic frame. So first I'm going to start off with an overview of the business frame that Lori mentioned earlier, a little bit more detail than she gave. Then I'm going to move on to our current non-employer statistics by demographics, or NESD, as I'll be using the rest of the presentation, their creation process. And then the last is the evaluation we conducted of the feasibility of using the demographic frame for NESD, and then the planned next steps. So next slide. All right, so first, let's talk about the business frame. The business frame is planned to be a collection of rich, harmonized data about businesses integrated from multiple data sources and stored in a central location. So we're taking business data from current Census Bureau sources, and we're harmonizing them and integrating them all together. The integration is currently being designed around the Census Bureau's business register, which is that comprehensive database of all U.S. employers and non-employer businesses and establishments. So I'm going to note here that the NESD microdata is included in the data that is planned to be in the business frame. Next slide. So a little bit more why we're building this. So Lori mentioned this earlier, but it's to support the facilitation and developing new data and improved data products. By building the business frame, staff can leverage existing survey and administrative data more effectively. Additionally, the business frame helps promote innovation and modernization efforts here at the Census Bureau. Next slide. So before we talk about NESD, let's first define a non-employer. So the Census Bureau defines a non-employer as a business with no paid employees, but are still subject to federal income taxes and have 1,000 or more of income. We often refer to these businesses as self-employed. So as of 2018, there were approximately 26 million non-employers, accounting for 83% of all U.S. businesses, but only 3% of receipts. Also note that between 2014 and 2018, non-employer growth outpaced that of the employer businesses. Next slide. So now that we defined a non-employer, let's talk about NESD. NESD is not a survey, but is created using only administrative records and census data. NESD data provides business counts and receipts by sex, ethnicity, race, and veteran status for geographic areas, 2 to 3 digit NAICS codes, receipt class size, and legal form of organization. Additionally, data for business owner age, place of birth, and citizenship status are calculated. Prior to the first release in 2020, with a reference year of 2017, non-employer business owner demographic information was collected via the Survey of Business Owners, or SBO, that was collected every 5 years. So using this administrative data to determine this information reduces the response burden on those very small companies. Business owner information for employers that was collected via SBO is not collected as part of the annual business survey, or ABS. Next slide. So NESD's initial universe is identified using the non-employer tables from the BR. A unique identifier, as Jennifer mentioned, called a protected identification key, or PIC, is found for business owners via either the IRS Form 1040 Schedule C for individual proprietors or IRS Schedule K1 form for partnerships and S corporation. Non-employer data also includes C corporation, but PICs are currently not available for these businesses via an administrative source. But C Corps are only 2% of the overall non-employer population, covering only 4% of receipts. So after PICs are identified, demographic data from the Decennial Census, ACS, Numinent, and Department of Veteran Affairs are assigned to the PIC. Currently, NESD has to determine themselves the best value for a given PIC across all these data sources. So now that we cover all the background, let's move on to why we're doing this. So first, we're adding NESD to the business frame so that we can use it in additional data products. By using NESD's NSD's methodology to identify business level characteristics, data products will be more comparable when used. Second, we're hoping using the demographic frame consolidates all the demographic data in one location and provides the best value for a given pick. So that lastly, NSD can using that demographic frame instead of that suite of demographic data will allow analysts more time to determine the relationship between business owners and businesses, especially for those businesses for which a pick is currently not available. Additionally, it would allow staff more time to focus on enhancing or creating new data products. Next slide. So before we get to the results of our evaluation, I want to spend some time explaining how the data are structured. The NSD microdata is unique for each person-business combination. This means the total count depends on which perspective you're looking at the data from. Let's look at an example. In this example, a husband and wife, person A and person B, run an individual proprietor business, business 1. Additionally, the husband, who's person A, runs a partnership business, business 2, with his friend, person C. Therefore, in this example, there are 3 unique people or picks, 2 unique businesses, but the microdata for NSD has 4 rows, so each combination from the picture. I'm going to pause and let you digest this for a moment. All right, next slide, Kayla. Okay, on the last slide, I explained how business owner and businesses can be related and how they can lead to different counts. So now let's look at the counts for this analysis. In the 2018 NSD, we observed 26 million unique business owners or picks and 25 million unique businesses. This result in 30 million unique person business records. After comparing 2018 NSD to the 2020 demographic frame, we found 25 million unique business owners or unique picks match. This means that the 2020 demographic frame had 97% of the 2018 NSD business owners. This resulted in us capturing 97% of the unique businesses and 97% of the person business records as well. Considering we couldn't match the data contemporaneously, the results are promising. Next slide. So to continue our evaluation of whether the demographic frame adequately covers the NSD universe, we wanted to do a sanity check and make sure that the matches are not skewed by type of business. From the diagram on the right, we know that over 80% of the non-employer businesses are individual proprietors. The table on the left tells us that all 3 business types that we have picks for, partnerships, individual proprietors, and S corporations, all had a match rate of 97% or higher. And just as a reminder, we do not have picks from an administrative source for C corporations. Next slide, thanks. Now let's dive into the analysis on how well the demographic characteristics compared between that 2018 NSD and the 2020 demographic frame. The percentages in this table represent the diagonal of the crosstab between the characteristics of the 2020 demographic frame and the 2018 NSD universe for only the picks that matched. To orient you to the table, let me explain a few cells. When race was missing on the demographic frame, it was also missing 48% of the time in the NSD universe, which means conversely, 52% of the time, one source had a race coded while the other didn't. Similarly, when the race for a person was coded as white on the demographic frame, it would also coded as white in the NSD universe, 96% of the time. As you read down the chart, you see that race matches 92% of the time for Black or African American, and then drops for American, Indian, and Alaska Native, again for Asian, and again for Native Hawaiian. Overall, race in the NSD universe was coded as the same race as the demographic frame 90% of the time. This is driven by the fact that the majority of NSD business owners and matched owners were white. Note that the race categories for NSD differ from the demographic frame. Specifically, following OMB's rules for business statistics and surveys, NSD does not publish the race category some other race, or two or more races. Those in two or more race category are assigned to multiple individual races for tabulation. Similarly, sex, Hispanic origin, and age have high agreement rates. So now that the 2018 demographic frame extract is available to users, we're looking forward to rerunning this analysis again using the same year of data with the same reference year. We think a lot of the differences that we've seen are due to that reference year difference. Next slide. So although these results are promising, what changes can the demographic frame to best serve NSD? We suggest the following improvements. First, we want to create a person level extract instead of the one that is uniquely defined as a person place pair. Additionally, the additional variables like veteran status, citizenship, and place of birth would need to be added. Next slide. So what next? We're going to repeat this analysis using that recently created 2020 demographic or 2018 demographic extract. So we can help better explore the reasons why some of these records we think should be in the demographic frame are not. Additionally, we're going to continue to explore the causes of the differences between the two frames. All right, and that's, I think, all I had, some resources, and that's it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. I think everyone will agree that through Erica's explanation of the work that she's doing with the business frame team, she further illustrated the power of enhancing our existing data sets and then linking those to other data sets that we have at the Census Bureau, in addition to external data sources. Let's now turn to a presentation that Chase Sawyer will deliver. Chase is currently working in our Social, Economic, and Housing Statistics Division and serving as the technical lead for modeled data product development. Chase, welcome. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, I'm excited to talk today about some research that we've been doing involving the American Community Survey. To see maybe some of the ways that the demographic frame can help the survey out and help make it a better and a even more premier data source. And so as we get started on the first slide, you'll go ahead and you're able to see just some kind of level setting about what the American Community Survey is. And so most people in this audience are probably well aware, but the survey does survey a number of different topics of 3.5 million addresses each year, and it helps to inform trillions now that we know of federal dollars. So there are key releases with 1-year estimates as well as 5-year estimates. On the next slide, I'll just go ahead and point out that there are 2 main data collection types and 3 main data collection modes that are used in the survey. There's an internet data collection mode, a mail collection mode that we use, both of which are used to gather self-responses to the survey, and then a subsample of respondents are selected for non-response follow-up, and that'll come up a little bit later. And so just a major reason why the ACS is important, it is a premier source of data for more than 40 different topics. It looks at social, demographic, economic, and housing information, and it provides us a way of looking and understanding this information for individuals and a number of geographies. On the next slide, I talk a bit about how these are really important because these decennial data products are used as benchmarks for the nation. So when we think of the decennial census, that major purpose is that we're enumerating every person. We're doing it every 10 years so that we have information on the population, including demographic information, housing counts that are then able to be used as a benchmark for congressional apportionment and then redistricting. The ACS has an additional role in being a benchmark for another purpose. And we're able to use sampled estimates to continuously collect information about the population. So we get even more detailed information about social, economic, and housing information. And this is really the benchmark that we use for federal funding within the federal space. But then there's, of course, a number of different public and private uses included as well. I really see, and on the next slide, I discuss how we can go ahead and utilize the demographic frame as a benchmark for benchmarks. Jennifer mentioned how they're doing benchmark comparisons to see, okay, how does the number of people line up with the population estimates? And this is something the American Community Survey can do as well, and allows us to go ahead and have different demographic information we can look at as we're doing that comparison. It also allows us to do some benchmark analysis for household counts on an individual and household level. So that will help us to better understand the households that are in sample, possibly even before we send a field representative or a mail package to that household. Also, it helps us to better analyze, of course, those individuals and their characteristics. And so on the next slide, as I start to get into some of the analysis, I will just go ahead and point out that today, as I'm showing comparisons between ACS data and the demographic frame, I don't see either as really an absolute truth. Really, instead, these are just two data sources that we can use to do comparisons and better understand each other. There are examples of why we wouldn't want to treat either as absolute truth. For example, we know that surveys and censuses often have an undercount of children, and because the demographic frame has tax records and different things, we think that that may provide us more information on children, help us maybe with that undercount in the ACS. In some instances, we know that housing records aren't as up to date as some of the information that we get from our samples and our surveys. And so that's a situation where we actually think, oh, maybe the survey is doing a more complete job. We're getting more up to date information. And then just overall, I will just mention the frame really is built on program participant data. Luckily, we have IRS and Social Security data, so there are quite a few program participants in those programs, but that is kind of the underpinning of it. And so maybe sometimes we get a little bit more with survey data. So really just overall pointing out there's differences here, but they can be complementary to each other. And so on the next slide, I describe the first set of analysis that we went ahead and started to do as we're exploring this with the ACS and the frame. And so we looked at how do the housing counts compare between the ACS and the frame. And so this is important because it might allow us to do some quality checks that if we see, okay, there's not an alignment very often, what's the reason for it? And again, the results don't have to be perfect for us to be able to start to find areas where we might have data quality issues. And so on the next slide, I decide some of the caveats here. When we're doing this analysis, we utilized the person-place model that had April 1st, 2020 as a reference date, whereas the ACS data we utilized was from 2019. And so while these don't temporally line up perfectly, that does get us a place to go ahead and get started and better understand the person-place model. And we are going ahead and we're subsetting on housing units that are in the frame as well as the ACS. So moving on, we're able to go ahead and see some of the results for this, that when we compared counts from ACS rosters to the number of people that were in a household based on the person-place model in the frame, the counts lined up exactly 64% of the time. There was about 13% of the time where there were more individuals reported in the ACS for a household than on the frame. And on the other side, there was about 23% of the time that the frame had more individuals listed in the household than the ACS did. And so there's a number of reasons why these don't line up perfectly. I think it does get to the idea, though, that that individuals may undercount or underreport on their roster in the ACS, though not always, as we see. But this should allow us to better understand, okay, what's going on here, and we're going to look into this more. Finding that we're able to see that we want to look into even more closely in the near term involves our response modes. And so moving on here, we're able to go ahead and see that when we looked at the perfect match rates between the frame and the ACS, for those that utilize the internet response mode, it was about right on par with what we had shown in the slide before, that 64.4% of internet respondents had the same household count. When we look at the mail response mode, we're able to see that 70.2% of the time the results lined up exactly. But when we looked at the individuals from our personal interviews, we saw that only 48.1% of the time those lined up perfectly. And so this is something we do want to go ahead and research more. We don't think that this necessarily shows, oh, there's a big issue with personal interview. We know that that group can be much more migratory and have different socioeconomic traits that make them more migratory, but it is something we want to explore to better understand, okay, are there instances where a field representative maybe doesn't have that household count line up all the time? So that's something we're going to look into more. And so moving on here to the next analysis that we went ahead and did, we wanted to do this on a more individual level to better understand how often the person, place, location matched between the ACS and the demographic frame. And so the hope here was that this will help us to better understand how often people show up at the same address, and also help us to better understand how often ACS might want to see updates to the person place model. And so on the next slide, we see that there are just those few caveats again, that we utilized a model that was a little further in the future than the ACS data we had. Again, we're looking to come back and redo this analysis now that we have a few more different sets of demographic frame reference dates we can use. And I'll also go ahead and say that overall, about 5% of person records could not be linked to an administrative record crosswalk. So as we walk through the results here, we'll go ahead and see that 76.8% of the time, we were able to find an ACS person record on the frame, and that respondent address matched the address that was chosen by the person place model as the best address. The next category, we were able to go ahead and find that there was another 9.4% of the time where the respondent address wasn't picked by the person or as the best address by the person place model, but it was an address that was listed as a possible address on the frame. And that leads to us having about 86.2% of the time where we saw ACS respondents and individuals listed in the roster having an address match between the frame and the ACS. For the next category, we went ahead and saw that about 10.3% of the time ACS person records were found on the frame, but that respondent address that was utilized in ACS didn't match any of the addresses that were found on the frame. But when we look at this overall, we are able to see that it leaves us with about 96.3% of ACS respondents being found on the demographic frame. Finally, in that last category, we did see that it was about 3.5% of the population that wasn't ACS respondents that weren't found on the frame. And so moving on to the next slide, we did want to go ahead and try to understand why or how getting closer to the reference date might help with some of these match rates. And so we looked at 3 different panels of ACS data collection. So we looked at the March panel that starts in March and then goes through May, and then we did this for July as well as October. So we had complete panels for the data year, and we were able to see that in fact, yes, the results do get better as we move closer to the reference date. The person place model has a higher match rate, and we also see decreases in the percentage of ACS respondents not found on the frame. So Again, we are excited to do a little more analysis where the temporal alignment's a little bit better, and just seeing how that works out. So overall, I think we are excited about the results we were able to see. So moving on, I'll just talk about two more areas that we're very interested in exploring. The first is that we would like to try to look at creating response rates by demographics. And so here on the graphic here is a way that we've looked at response rates in the past, that we've looked at areas that have a higher percentage of the population than the national average for different race and ethnicity groups to go ahead and serve as a proxy for actual response rates. Because we get these requests where individuals want to see, okay, well, what's the response rate based on a person's race and ethnicity? And we actually aren't able to tell the individuals because we don't know that race and ethnicity until they start to respond to the survey. But the demographic frame does give us this opportunity that we'll be able to go ahead and look at creating such tabulation. The next slide, you're able to see that we also hope as well that we'll be able to utilize this as part of some non-response bias work that we've been doing, that we've utilized administrative records to do this in the past. But if the demographic frame is there and available, we hope that we can utilize that as part of this work. And so finally, just to go ahead and finish up, I'll summarize, but we do really see the demographic frame as a potential way to help with quality assurance, as well as something that we can use in the possible production of ACS going forward. And I'm excited about that. So I'm very grateful I had the opportunity to go over some of the results we're seeing, and look forward to any questions that people may have.
Excellent, Chase. Thank you so much. It is so exciting to see the possibilities when you directly apply the demographic frame to the ACS. And I hope others on the call are thinking about how they may be applying the work of the various frames to their work at hand too.
Definitely.
Thank you. Let's now turn to Megan Tidings. Megan, we're happy to have you with us this afternoon. Megan is currently working within the Decennial Census Management Division as part of the Person Frame branch. And Megan, tell us the exciting things you're doing in relation to the demographic frame as you plan the 2030 census, please.
Thank you so much. So I get to wrap up talking about how we're going to be using the demographic frame in the 2030 census. So if we go to the next slide, please. All right, so today what we're going to do is we'll start off looking at how we used administrative data use, or how we used administrative data in the 2020 census to give that reference point before turning and seeing how we're looking at using administrative data and how we're researching the use of administrative data for the 2030 census. As part of that, we'll talk about the plans for the demographic frame in the 2030 census, and then close out talking about some of the testing and evaluation of the demographic frame that our team is doing in the 2030 program. Next slide, please. All right, so to start, let's talk a little bit about how the decennial census combined and used administrative data during the 2020 census. So the 2020 census used administrative data, which we defined as federal, state, and local data, internal Census Bureau data, third-party data, and publicly available data to try to reduce costs, keeping the quality, and improving the efficiency of operations. Several core sources were used to support this, including internal census data collected from operations, as well as data from the IRS. And so for the 2020 census data, administrative data were used to create composites that contained variables like address, householder name, householder roster and relationships, and demographic data. These composites were created for the purpose of the 2020 census, so they were unique composites rather than the kind of enterprise living frame that we see now. And there were two primary types of composites that were created for 2020, a Title 26 composite that included federal tax information, and a Title 13 composite that did not have that federal tax information. And extracts of these composites were then sent to various operations who did additional processing and used those composites in production. Next slide, please. So administrative data in 2020 were used in a variety of operations. We used it to support the initial contact strategy. So we used it to determine how we would send the initial invitation to respondents. And we used admin data to identify addresses in certain geographic areas to get bilingual English-Spanish invitations and questionnaire. It was used to develop and execute the micro-targeted advertising campaign. So we used demographic and geographic information to really target advertising to specific populations. It was used to augment respondent-provided addresses for respondents who decided to respond via non-ID response or without that pre-assigned census response. And it was used to enhance matching to the updated enumeration address list. We also used it for quality assurance in the paper data capture operation to ensure that we had a higher confidence in the information captured from paper responses, as well as to conduct response data verification. Admin data was used in multiple ways in non-response follow-up, so the door-to-door enumerators. We used it to reduce the number of field contacts for vacant and delete units. We also reduced the non-response follow-up workload by using admin data to enumerate occupied housing units that did not respond after multiple contact attempts. And we used it for a best time to contact model. And then we used it to assist with resolving duplicate responses, conducting imputation, and informing coverage evaluation. So next slide, looking ahead to 2030, the goal for 2030 is to expand on the admin data innovations that were implemented in 2020 while continuing to look for ways to improve admin data coverage and quality. And all this really is being done with the goal of streamlining operations and minimizing burden while reducing costs and maintaining quality. We're looking to expand the use of admin data for the 2030 census in two primary areas. The first is looking to expand admin data coverage by identifying and acquiring new admin data sources. And then the second is many of the research areas are looking to see how they can expand the application of admin data and improve the methodologies employed for admin data in the decennial census. So on the next slide, we see a little bit about the research that's being done in admin data for the 2030 census. So right now, as a lot of folks know, we're in the design selection phase where we're doing research testing and operational planning and design work that's going to inform the selection of that initial 2030 operational design. We've started dozens of research projects to look at topics from self-response to listing and enumeration to building alternative data and methods. And during this phase, there's really multiple areas where we're researching using admin data. So that includes expanding the use of admin data to reduce in-field enumeration and mail workloads, looking at how we can use admin data further to increase response data quality and ensure we get those high quality standards, expanding the use of admin data in data processing and imputation, and also seeing how we can use admin data to improve coverage, particularly the coverage for historically undercounted populations like young children. We're also looking at admin data in areas like Puerto Rico and island areas and these non-stateside areas and seeing how we can use admin data in areas that didn't use it in 2020, as well as determining how to expand the use of admin data in outreach and contact strategies and incorporate admin data into group quarters enumeration. So on the next slide, we see that a significant component of the 2030 plans for admin data includes using the demographic frame. So as you recall, in 2020, we used those composites that were created specifically for 2020. In 2030, we're going to leverage the demographic frame for the administrative data needs of the decennial. We're planning on using the demographic frame and potentially enhancing it with items or data elements that may be decennial specific and not needed by the whole enterprise, but really relying on the demographic frame for admin data needs. Right now, the 2030 project teams are actively working with the demographic frame team to look and see what requirements are for 2030 and ways to enhance and address them. We're looking to see how to incorporate these enhancements, whether it's putting it directly in the demo frame or in cases where they're unique to 2030, how to incorporate them via auxiliary data sets that are able to be linked. And so on the next slide, we can see the 4 areas of testing and evaluation that are currently under progress for the 2030 project team in regards to the demographic frame. So current research includes first assessing the current inventory of admin data to identify areas of improvement. This is looking at questions like where are the strengths and weaknesses of the current admin data composite? Are there populations, demographic groups, geographic areas where admin data coverage, we really need to try to bolster it or could be improved? Second, using this, as I mentioned earlier, to try to acquire new trusted sources of admin data to meet these areas of improvement. That can be state level sources, it can be voter registration, Department of Voter Vehicle data. We're looking at a variety of data sources to really try to meet these areas of coverage and improvement. It also looks at seeing if there's sources that could help improve the coverage of historically undercounted populations specifically. Third, identifying data sources that can be used for operations in areas that didn't use admin data in 2020, such as Puerto Rico and the island areas. And last, really assessing the demographic frame and the fitness of use for the demographic frame in terms of 2030 needs. So on the next slide, we can see, diving into this last area just a little bit more, the 2030 program is currently working to assess the fitness for use of the demographic frame for decennial operations. This is a collaborative process with the demographic frame team and the 2030 team, really to not only assess the fitness for use, but identify how this can help drive conversations around enhancements and areas where we can make it stronger. In the assessment process, we're comparing the 2020 census unedited file to the demographic frame, looking at both a nationwide analysis as well as by specific geographic areas, demographic groups such as age, race, ethnicity, as well as other characteristics such as how different folks responded in 2020. These again are helping to shape the requirements for the demographic frame in areas where there may be areas for additional exploration. So what have these found so far? First, we found a reasonably high PIC coverage, and that indicates that a good percentage of the country really does have some admin data. However, we also saw room to grow in our picking process, as we observed people who were data-defined persons in 2030 that didn't have a valid PIC. And this hindered that linkage process to the demographic frame, since you do have to have that PIC to link. We also observed data-defined persons from the 2020 census universe that had a valid PIC, but didn't necessarily match to the demographic frame. And these persons tended to show higher rates of people aged 55 plus, higher rates of internet self-response in 2020, and higher rates of missingness for race. And finally, we identified geographic areas in the US where we might be able to improve PIC coverage, either by incorporating additional administrative records or enhancing the picking process. And so finally, on the last slide, what are our next steps? So looking forward, first, we're continuing to look at the demographic frame and evaluate it, diving into some of those more in-depth comparisons in order to determine how to potentially improve coverage or develop additional enhancements. Second, as I've said several times in this presentation, we're trying to find additional admin data sources to improve coverage and working with those inside the 2030 program and outside the program to figure out who's going to be using these sources and how. And finally, all of this really is being incorporated into our efforts to inform the 2030 design process. So thank you so much. I appreciate the chance to get to talk with you about our plans for 2030 and happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great, Megan. Thank you very much. That was an extremely informative presentation. The use of administrative data in support of the 2020 census was very effective, and it's exciting to think about what the demographic frame could bring to the picture as you plan for the 2030 census. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the panelists today. You all did a brilliant job of sharing information about the Frames program and how we're progressing. Recognizing that we are short on time here, I'd also like to thank the audience for your attention and invite you to continue to add questions to the chat here after you've had a chance to absorb this, review the slides, review the recording, or send us an email. Mike Radcliffe posted the address there in the chat, geo.frames, just went away, geo.frames.pgmo@census.gov. Additionally, we will be publishing a counterpart story that shares feedback from what we hear from you all today and could serve as an opportunity to address any questions you may continue to have. Thank you very much. Let's give the presenters a round of applause, please. Wonderful. Thank you again. Have a nice afternoon.